Hi, I'm Garbreak1, and this is Migdardia's Cool Crowdfunding Show. I'm here today with Matt Wilson. How's it going?
Good, good. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. It's wonderful. Uh, so you're here today to talk about Warcaster. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
WARCASTER is the newest miniatures game from Privateer Press. We've been around for 20 years, and we're best known for making miniatures games like War Machine and Hordes, Monster Apocalypse, Riot Quest, and WARCASTER is the newest game to join the shelf with them. We've got it up on Kickstarter right now. We launched it, I believe, on March 4th. It's all a blur now. What's the date? A few days
March 10th is today. Yeah.
It launched just last Wednesday, um, and it funded in 27 minutes, which was very exciting for us to watch happen. So we were pretty much out of the gate. The project was a go. Since then, we over tripled the funding on that. We've added a whole bunch of stretch goals to the package, and it's looking great. And we're not even halfway through it. So the game itself is a sci-fi miniatures game. You play with a full-size game is about 25 models. You can play a skirmish game at about 8 models. Both levels are great. Um, it is related to the history of our other game, War Machine. War Machine is set in a place called the Iron Kingdoms, and Warcaster is a jump 5,000 years in the future and in a very different place. It's no longer in the Iron Kingdoms. It's spread out across a galaxy called Cirrus, and um, and things are very different. The game is Warcaster plays very differently than War Machine. And in fact, in Warcaster, if you have any familiarity with War Machine, instead of the Warcaster being a character on the tabletop, we've made the player the Warcaster, and so you customize your powers through a card deck called ciphers. They're like spells, and you can cast these onto your models that are on the tabletop. Um, there are other models called weavers. Weavers are they can tap into a certain kind of cipher called a fury. So basically, they're your magic cannons that you put out onto the battlefield. Um, you command warjacks, you command troops, and other specialist solos. And um, the warcaster's job is to support all these units on the battlefield with their ability to uh, charge them with arc. Arc is short for arcanescence, and arcanescence is the energy that flows throughout the galaxy, and it's a limited resource, and everybody uses it to power a technology called Mechanika. Mechanika is kind of like magic and mechanical stuff working together. And so they all want this arc, and this arc occurs naturally out of geysers deep in the planets of this galaxy. And so they're constantly fighting over it, trying to gain control of the resources so that they can power the Mechanica to fight more wars and get more arc. So in the game, you use the arc by the Warcaster has a certain number of arcanescence points, arc points that they can allocate to their various models. When a model has arc on it, that model's charged. They don't spend it. While they are charged, and they can be charged an entire game, that arc confers some sort of benefit to them. Uh, it might charge equipment that helps them move faster, or it might make their weapons more deadly. They also have what are called spike powers. So if you overload or sort of overcharge the model, then you remove the spike, or you remove the arc, and then it does something even bigger, but it's a one-shot effect. So as the Warcaster, each turn you're manipulating your arc, moving it around to the different models that you want to concentrate on. And that way you kind of are able to put your power where you want it on the battlefield. The games are scenario driven with a lot of objective points. And so because of the way we've laid out these scenarios, the battles tend to happen all over the map. And it's a very fast. The game is it's easy to get around the map. So you're not necessarily walking from one side to the other, but you bring your models into play through gates called void gates. And so your reserves are held back on your Warcaster's battle carrier, and each turn you can deploy these void gates and then summon more units onto the battlefield. as your units get destroyed and taken off the battlefield, they go back into your reserves. And so you constantly have a supply. You always have a supply of units that you can draw on, unless you get everything in your reserves all the way out onto the battlefield. But because of this, and because of your ability to place these void gates in different locations, you can get models across the table or to these other objectives very quickly. And so it's a pretty, in some ways, it's a bit of an unpredictable game, because you don't necessarily know where your opponent's going to place that next void gate, where the next threat is going to come from. At the same time, you're trying to sort of create beachheads and defend them. And so it's a very dynamic game. You don't lose to attrition, because you can almost not get tabled, especially in larger games where you've got a lot of models to work with. There's no assassination in it, where if you lose one piece, you lose the game. So typically you're going to play to scenario. The scenarios are they're timed, not timed by the minutes, but they use a round tracker called a pulse tracker. And so if we're playing a game, every time we both take a turn, we advance that tracker once, and then after it's gone around 5 times, that's usually the end of the scenario. But different scenarios can have different timers as well. So that was a whole bunch. I probably just kind of like threw up a whole bunch of information there. But
that's all good. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So the void gates, you have like it's about a turn before they actually drop the unit in, right? So you have a moment to like rearrange your troops and defend against where that's coming in. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the turns have a phase structure, and the game plays. It's an alternating activation. So you'll move a model and make your attacks with that model, and then I'll move a model and make the attacks with that model. And then in your game turn, at one point you have the option to put a gate out. You can only have 2 gates in play at a time, so it's not like they're coming from everywhere. But most of the time, the way the game will go, a gate probably will only stick around in one place for a couple of turns before its arc is depleted. So when you put the gate into play, you charge it with arc. That governs how much you can deploy through it, and different models have different costs for deployment. There's no actual point cost for army building. You just pick up to 15 units that you want to bring into the game, and those that becomes your battle force. The cost is how much arc they cost to deploy onto the battlefield. So a solo is 1 point of arc. A light warjack is 2, and so you can have up to 5 arc on a gate. And when you deploy, you can deploy as many things as you want, up to the amount of arc you have, and then that arc goes back to the Warcaster. And when the gate doesn't have arc on it anymore, it collapses. But if you want to leave it out there, you can leave a point of arc on it. You can charge it up with more arc on another turn if you want to keep bringing things out at that point. So there's a lot of different things that you can manipulate as far as the gate goes.
That's super cool. Is there anything that costs 5 arc to deploy?
That's a Crunchy Rules question. I think that the heavy warjacks are 4, if I'm not mistaken. And so at this point, I don't believe that there is 5, but there probably will be in the future.
Excellent. It's like this giant, monstrous warjack comes out of the gate.
Yeah. I mean, the rule of thumb is the bigger it is, the more arc it's going to cost. So, and definitely, we like to make big models.
Yeah, you guys make some good stuff. I have a Prime Remix book off to the side here. I was gonna drag it out somewhere, and then I didn't. So, what can you tell me about the factions of Neo-Mechanika?
So we have 3 factions that we've introduced in this Kickstarter. The first one is the Iron Star Alliance, and the Iron Star Alliance is sort of an imperialistic coalition of worlds that have accepted alliance control, and their mission is to spread throughout the galaxy and control as much of it as possible. They're probably the most high-tech looking guys. They've got soldiers called paladins, that have cool body armor and weapons that change configurations. Um, and then they are, let me see, what else can I tell you about them? They use a lot of energy weapons, and they've got some really great defensive abilities with power fields and things like that that uh, can provide mobile cover for their troops. The second faction is called the Marcher Worlds. Marchers, it's a sort of an archaic word, but Marcher lands are sort of borderlands, right? And so the Marchers exist sort of on the fringe of this galaxy, or in places that haven't been explored. And they're more of a free people, live and let live. They just want to be left out of the alliance, but the conflicts keep coming. They're sort of scavengers, but they use the resources that they have, and they don't have a lot of resources like the alliance because they don't have the same kind of resources and revenue and things like that. They don't have a lot of factories or things, so they tend to be very good at upcycling things and reusing stuff. So they look a little more ragtag. They're not as slick and shiny as the alliance. And then we have the Eternus Continuum, and the Eternus Continuum is sort of a fringe cult that has embraced the philosophy of immortality through mechanical augmentation and replacement. So there's a lot of guys with cybernetics. There's a solo called a Marauder that is really just a head and a torso that gets clipped into a big suit of weaponized armor. And they also they have sort of a mystical vibe to them as well, more so than the others, even though everybody's kind of using arcane power. So, and so those are the three that we have right now, and they're all sort of competing for control and their preferred existence in this galaxy of Cirrus, which is where the 1,000 worlds of Cirrus are connected by a network of giant void gates called the Hyper-Uranian. Hyper-Uranian is sort of a web that connects these planets. And so in Warcaster, they don't actually have space travel. They don't have spaceships that go into space and land on other planets. They travel from planet to planet through these void gates. But between each of these gates is the void, and that void has to be traversed by some sort of vehicle or ship. It's not something that you can just walk through. So they have big airships, big carriers that fly through these gates and connect the worlds. And each gate is only connected to one other gate. And so a planet might have dozens of these gates on them that connect to various places, but they only open at certain times. And so there's a weird bird outside my window. There's timing and planetary alignments and things that have to happen for them to be able to travel from one place to another. And the Hyper-Uranian is an ancient construction, and humanity is actually relatively new. They've been around here for about 5,000 years, where they spread out through this thing. But but when they got there, the guys that built the Hyper-Uranian were called the Architects, and they fought a war, and the Architects retreated to the very center of the galaxy, Cirrus Prime, and that's where the Hyper-Uranian is controlled. And so humanity has explored and spread out through these gates, but they haven't explored the entire galaxy. They don't have a map for the whole thing, so they're still in the process of exploring it and finding what connects to what, and of course running into dangerous stuff. So
That's super cool. A lot of places for conflict, a lot of logistics concerns for scenarios, that kind of thing. So you've chosen a somewhat unusual distribution model for this compared to your previous projects. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd say it's different than what we've done with other miniatures games before, but I wouldn't say it's unusual these days.
Fair enough.
We've taken to Kickstarter with it. It's we haven't launched a miniatures game on Kickstarter, but we have used Kickstarter for several other projects, including art book and board games in the past. We wanted to try it for Warcaster because we feel that the visibility that Kickstarter brings to a new project can help it get off the ground faster. It's a tricky market right now to launch a new game product because there is so much out there that you're really competing for visibility on the shelves of game stores, and to launch something brand new can be difficult. And so we decided that Kickstarter would be a great place to try this, and we've built out a plan that is several years long, where we will continue to use Kickstarter as the platform to launch blocks of content for Warcaster. But we are also supporting retail stores with it. We have retailer pledges. We offer our standard retailer discount to the retailers that want to pledge and get in on the game early. After the rewards deliver from the Kickstarter campaign, they will be offered to retail stores through standard distribution. So their street dates for in-store will be probably a month to 2 months after the rewards arrive to the backers of the project. But if retailers back it, they get their goods at the same time that the backers do.
Cool. And speaking of the delivery date, what can you tell me about the production/delivery timeline for Warcaster?
And that's the part that's unusual, because most Kickstarters, you pledge for a Kickstarter and you might be waiting a year or two while this thing gets made overseas. But we do our own production. We do have a couple of components, some cards and the tokens that come in the starter boxes that are coming from overseas, but those are much faster turnaround than, say, making miniatures. The miniatures that we make in our own facility in Woodinville, Washington, they only take a few months for us to go from concept to production. So the Kickstarter that is running right now is expected to deliver no later than July of this year. So it's only a few months away.
Dang, that is quite the... Yeah.
It'll be a fast turnaround. So it doesn't get too much faster than that when it comes to Kickstarter products. But and we're also shipping multiple waves. So the Kickstarter that's running right now is actually funding 4 months of product releases. So there will be a wave that ships by July, another in August, another in September, and so on. And so and basically it just kind of keeps up with our normal rate of release that we do on a monthly basis. For the last 18 years, we've been releasing new miniatures just about every single month the entire time we've been in business.
Excellent. So there's not much risk of your launch getting delayed by like the COVID-19 pandemic, or
it's least... not unless the two things that are coming from overseas got delayed in shipping, that would put a little bit of a hiccup in our game plan here. We've actually made that very clear in the risks and challenges that we put on the Kickstarter site. At this point, everything looks good, but it sort of remains to be seen. Everything, the information on the pandemic changes every day, and we haven't quite yet seen how it's affecting shipping yet, but it's expected to possibly affect that. So hopefully we have our orders in on things early enough and we won't be hamstrung by that.
I'm glad to hear that you're prepared.
Yeah.
And I see that you've avoided the classic Kickstarter pitfall of having a bunch of like scope creep kind of stretch goals, which I'm very glad to see.
What kinds? Sorry?
Scope creep. Adding new factions, new miniatures.
Right. No, we had to spend a lot of time designing a Kickstarter that was tailored to a miniatures game and the way that players are going to buy and collect the miniatures. And at the same time, be able to support that desired tradition of some compelling stretch goals that are going to help drive the campaign forward. But we worked all of that out. Again, we've been producing miniatures on our own for a long time, so it's it's just what we do. We know how to price these things out and estimate them, and we know how much margin that we have to cover the stretch goals that we have in there. And so we've tried to make sort of a compelling road of these goals and some of them do add more miniatures to the rewards. So at this point, right now, just with the extra miniatures that have been unlocked in the stretch goals, it's a $70 pledge for a starter is worth about $95 in extra miniature. Well, it is worth about $95 with the extra miniatures that you would receive. So, and I think the way things are going right now, I would expect us to unlock even more before the end of it.
Yeah, there are a few extra miniatures, but they're alternate sculpts and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, well, some of them are. Yeah, they're alternate sculpts. You use a lot of the same types of models, like because of the way Warcaster works and your ability to redeploy models that have been destroyed. It's a good idea to have backups or duplicates, especially of certain models like the Weaver. Your Weaver is, as I mentioned, sort of your magic cannon. Your Warcaster channels Furies through the Weaver, and Furies are your direct damage spells. Those are your fireballs and your lightning bolts and stuff like that. And if you don't want to be without a Weaver, so if your Weaver gets sent away and you don't have one on the table, then that's kind of no bueno. Um, so knowing that people are likely to have multiples of things, we've done variations on them, and that's because people like to have variety in the miniatures, so they don't all just look the same. So that's been one of the stretch goals, was to add a variant model, a variant solo to your battle force, which we unlocked that one real quick or recently. That was over the weekend, right? So, and then there was another one for actual miniatures of the void gates. So in the starter, you get there's like a punch out token for the void gates, but now if you back the project, you get 2 miniatures to represent your void gates, which are a little bit cooler. Down the road, there are several add-on stretch goals for variant poses of the Warjacks, and then there's some weapon packs coming up and some new Cortexes that are hiding out there in the stretch goals, and those would actually be new things that get added to your stash there. So,
all right, cool. Well, this seems like a really interesting game, and my first thought upon looking at it was, is this just going to be, Warma Hordes but with a sci-fi coat of paint? But it really isn't. It's very much its own distinct product, and I appreciate that.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really different. There's a lot of the DNA from War Machine in it. You can see there's how this new setting evolved from the old one, but the gameplay is wildly different. And really pushing into the sci-fi realm with the designs. So some of the Warjacks, I love the Warjacks in these, especially these heavy ones that are coming. We've shown the concept artwork for them, but they're all in sculpting right now, and they're awesome.
Yeah, they're fantastic. What's your favorite faction, by the way?
I don't have a favorite right now. It's and if I had to pick one to play, I don't know which one it would be at the moment. I love the way the Iron Star Alliance plays. They have a lot of great synergy with the Paladins. Um, I am a huge fan of the aesthetic of the Marchers. Right, I like that sort of ragtag guerrilla fighter feel that they have. Um, but the Warjacks of the Continuum are probably my favorites right now, especially the Nemesis that's coming up. It's a flying Warjack with these crazy like wasp wings, and it just looks amazing. So I will eventually just play them all.
I mean, that's fair. That Jack sounds awesome, by the way.
Yeah, they're pretty neat. We've got pictures of them up on the site. So
Well, is there anything else you'd like to bring up while you're here?
I'm just if anybody's interested in checking it out, you can go to warcaster.com, and that's our landing page for the game. There's more in-depth information on how the game plays, on the factions, on the setting itself. Probably does a much better job of explaining things than I do myself. So I would encourage anybody to check that out. And then if you are interested in checking out the Kickstarter, it goes until March 20th, ends midnight Pacific time on March 20th. It's a Go game. It's already funded well over 300% right now. Go on there and check out all the stretch goals. We've unlocked new stretch goals at every $25,000 in funding since 100,000 when it actually opened up. So that's like 8 stretch goals. It'll be 9 probably in the next 24 hours. So
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming by to talk to me today.
thanks for having me.
And for those of you watching at home, have a good night.
Take care.